pirate ship carried 200 men for 6 months at sea. No refrigeration, no fresh water source, no way to call for help. And yet, they didn't just survive. They thrived well enough to terrorize entire empires. How? Because pirates solved problems that modern survivalists still struggle with today. And their solutions were shockingly simple. It all started with the one thing that could kill them fastest. Fresh water was the difference between life and death at sea. Not gold, not rum, water. Pirates knew this better than anyone. Before setting sail on a 6-month voyage, they'd spend days rolling massive wooden barrels called casks onto their ships. These things held anywhere from 30 to 50 gallons each, and they were heavy enough to crush a man's foot if he wasn't careful. I'm talking about the kind of back-breaking work that makes your gym membership look like a joke. Here's where it gets interesting. Pirates couldn't just fill these barrels with any old water and call it a day. The wood itself was a problem. Leave water sitting in an untreated barrel, and within a week, it tastes like you're drinking a soggy tree branch. So they lined the insides with pitch or charcoal. This slowed down bacterial growth and kept that awful woody flavor from ruining their water supply. But let's do some math here. A single pirate needed roughly 1 gallon of water per day just to survive. That's the bare minimum. Now multiply that by a crew of 80 men, then multiply again by 180 days. You're looking at over 14,000 gallons of water. That's enough to fill a small swimming pool, and they had to haul every drop of it aboard by hand. Makes you appreciate your kitchen faucet, doesn't it? Not all water sources were created equal either. Pirates actually preferred rainwater they'd collected in barrels on shore over river water. Why? Rivers were basically parasite highways back then, full of sediment, animal waste, and enough microscopic nasties to give an entire crew dysentery. Rainwater was cleaner. Not perfect, but cleaner. Now here's the gross part, and trust me, it gets gross. After about 2 weeks at sea, even the best stored water started turning green. Slimy green. The kind of green that makes you question every life choice that led you to this moment. Algae bloomed inside those barrels like it was trying to start its own ecosystem. Did pirates dump it? Absolutely not. They strained it through cloth and drank it anyway. The cloth caught the chunks. The chunks. Let that sink in for a moment. These men were filtering their drinking water like a makeshift coffee maker, except instead of coffee grounds, they were catching algae clumps. Desperate times call for disgusting measures. This is exactly why captains rationed water from day one. And I mean strict rationing. Each man got maybe a quart or two daily. Didn't matter if you were sweating through Caribbean heat or working the rigging until your hands bled. Your water allowance stayed the same. Some captains were so paranoid about water that they posted armed guards near the barrels. Getting caught stealing extra water could get you whipped, or worse. When survival depends on making 14,000 gallons last 6 months, every sip matters. The cruel irony? Pirates spent their entire lives surrounded by water they couldn't drink. The ocean was right there, miles of it in every direction. Completely useless. Drinking seawater would kill you faster than dying of thirst. The salt would dehydrate you from the inside out. So they rationed. They filtered green slime. They lined barrels with charcoal and hoped for the best. But what happened when those carefully stored barrels finally ran dry? That's when things got creative. And by creative, I mean pirates had to literally make drinkable water appear out of thin air. All right, so the water's going bad, it's turning green, and you're stuck in the middle of the Atlantic with nothing but ocean in every direction. Here's the problem. You're surrounded by water you cannot drink. Seawater has so much salt that drinking it actually dehydrates you faster. Your kidneys go into overdrive trying to flush out the salt, and you end up worse than before. It's like eating a whole bag of chips when you're thirsty, except it kills you. So pirates had to get creative. The most sophisticated method was distillation. Basically, you boil seawater in a covered pot, catch the steam, and let it condense back into liquid. The salt stays behind. The water that drips out is perfectly drinkable. Sounds simple enough, right? Well, here's the catch. This process was painfully slow. We're talking maybe 1 gallon per hour if you were lucky, and that gallon cost you precious firewood or coal that you needed for cooking actual food. So unless you were truly desperate, distillation was more of a last resort than a daily solution. It's like using your emergency savings to buy groceries. You can do it, but you really don't want to. The real lifesaver was rain. When storms rolled in, pirates didn't just batten down the hatches, they got to work collecting. They'd stretch sails out like giant funnels, angling them so rainwater ran down into waiting barrels. A single good downpour could gather hundreds of gallons in just a few hours. That's more water than the ship might use in a week. I've been caught in a sudden rainstorm before and just stood there annoyed, waiting for it to pass. Pirates saw that same storm and thought, jackpot. Different perspective entirely. But what about when there was no rain? Morning dew became surprisingly valuable. Every dawn, moisture would settle on the sails and deck surfaces. Crew members would go around with cloths, literally wiping down every surface they could reach and wringing out the water into containers. The amounts were small, maybe a few cups total. But when you're dying of thirst, a few cups might as well be a swimming pool. Now here's where things get dark. When water supplies ran critically low, some crews resorted to chewing on lead musket balls. The metal stimulated saliva production, which temporarily relieved the sensation of thirst. It didn't actually hydrate you. It just tricked your brain into thinking you weren't as thirsty. And the side effect? Lead poisoning. Slow, cumulative lead poisoning that caused everything from memory loss to madness. Some historians think this might explain why certain pirates seemed genuinely crazy. They weren't born that way. They poisoned themselves trying to survive. Makes you look at those mad pirate captain stories a little differently. The ultimate prize wasn't gold or silver. It was stumbling across an uncharted island with a freshwater stream. Pirates actually valued this more than finding a Spanish treasure galleon. Gold doesn't keep you alive in the middle of nowhere. Fresh water does. There's a documented case of a pirate crew passing up a merchant ship because they spotted an island with a waterfall. They chose water over wealth. That tells you everything about their priorities. But getting water was only half the battle. Because even with full barrels and distillation setups and rain collection systems, none of it mattered if your crew starved to death first. And the food situation aboard pirate ships, somehow even more disgusting than the water. Now let's talk about what pirates actually ate. And trust me, it wasn't pretty. The real staple of every pirate's diet was hardtack. This stuff was basically a brick made of flour and water, baked multiple times until every drop of moisture was gone. We're talking about something so hard you could probably use it as a weapon. One sailor from the 1700s described it as more suitable for building houses than eating. But here's the thing. That extreme dryness meant hardtack could last for years. Years. I've got leftovers in my fridge from last week that are already suspicious, and these guys were eating biscuits older than some of their crew members. Then there was the meat situation. Salted beef and pork came packed in barrels filled with brine so strong it could pickle your grandmother. The salt drew out all the moisture, which stopped bacteria from growing. Smart, right? The downside? This meat turned gray. Sometimes greenish gray. And it was so tough and salty that sailors had to soak it in water for hours just to make it chewable. Some guys carved the stuff into buttons or belt buckles because it was literally that hard. Not joking. Dried peas, beans, and lentils filled out the rest of the diet. These came packed in sacks and could be boiled into thick soups that stretched ingredients across multiple meals. A cook could feed 80 men with a barrel of peas, some salted pork chunks, and whatever else was lying around. It tasted like nothing you'd order at a restaurant, but it kept men alive. And on a ship in the middle of nowhere, that's all that mattered. Here's something most people don't realize. Ships actually carried live animals on deck. Chickens in cages, pigs in pens, sometimes even goats. These weren't pets. They were walking meat lockers. Fresh eggs every morning for the first few weeks. Then fresh pork when the animal feed ran out. The captain ate well while supplies lasted. Common sailors? They got whatever was left after the officers finished. Cheese was surprisingly common too. Big wheels coated in thick layers of wax that sealed out air and bacteria. These wheels didn't rot. They just got harder. By month 3, you needed a knife to shave off edible portions. By month 5, you needed determination and good teeth. But cheese provided protein and fat that kept men strong enough to work the rigging. And then there's the elephant in the room. Rum, wine, alcohol in general. Ships dedicated massive amounts of cargo space to booze, and not because pirates were all drunks. Well, not entirely because of that. The real reason? Alcohol was genuinely safer to drink than water that had been sitting in a barrel for 2 months. Water went bad. Rum didn't. A mixture of rum and water called grog became the standard drink because it made the questionable water taste better and killed some of the nasties growing in it. So the average pirate ate rock-hard biscuits, gray meat that required hours of preparation, boiled legumes, increasingly hard cheese, and washed it all down with watered-down rum. Not exactly fine dining. Makes my worst camping trip look like a 5-star restaurant experience, but getting food aboard was only half the battle. Keeping it edible for 6 months in tropical heat with no refrigeration, that required some genuinely clever tricks that would surprise even modern food scientists. Here's the thing about keeping food edible for months at sea. You couldn't just throw meat in a barrel and hope for the best. That's how you get a ship full of dead pirates. Instead, they turned preservation into an art form. A disgusting, smelly art form, but effective. Salt was king. Pirates packed raw meat into barrels with layers of salt crystals so thick you could barely see the flesh underneath. The salt pulled moisture straight out of the meat, and without moisture, bacteria couldn't grow. Simple science, really, though pirates didn't call it science. They called it not dying. The process took weeks. You'd slice beef or pork into chunks, rub salt into every surface, then stack the pieces in barrels with more salt between each layer. The result? Meat that could last a year or more. The downside? It tasted like licking a salt mine. Before eating, sailors had to soak it overnight just to make it chewable. Sometimes for 24 hours straight, but wait, salt wasn't the only trick up their grimy sleeves. Smoking came next. Fish and meat hung over low, smoldering fires for days until the outside turned into something resembling leather. That dried outer layer sealed everything inside, added weeks of shelf life. Plus, it actually tasted decent. Well, decent compared to gray salt beef that had been sitting in brine since you were a teenager. Then there's pickling, and no, I'm not talking about your grandmother's cucumber jars. Pirates pickled whatever they could get their hands on. Cabbage became sauerkraut. Onions went into vinegar baths. Anything that grew from the ground could be preserved this way. Here's the funny part. Sauerkraut actually prevented scurvy. The vitamin C in fermented cabbage kept pirates healthy on long voyages. Did they know this? Absolutely not. They just knew that crews eating sauerkraut didn't lose their teeth and die. Good enough reason to keep making it. Sugar worked differently, but just as well. Fruits were rare and precious. When pirates got their hands on mangoes, oranges, or any tropical fruit, they boiled them down with sugar into thick jams. The sugar concentration was so high that bacteria simply couldn't survive in it. Plus, after months of hardtack and salt pork, a spoonful of fruit jam felt like finding treasure. Actual treasure. Now, some preservation methods got creative. Hanging salted meat in the ship's rigging let constant sea breezes keep everything dry. Natural air conditioning, basically. Only problem? Seabirds loved it too. Leave your meat unguarded for an hour, and seagulls would have themselves a feast at your expense. Many pirates learned this lesson exactly once. Makes sense, right? You adapt or you starve. And speaking of adaptation, let's talk about weevils. These tiny beetles infested hardtack within weeks of leaving port, burrowed right inside those rock-hard biscuits, and made themselves at home. Could pirates do anything about it? Not really. So they developed a strategy. Eat in complete darkness. If you can't see the bugs crawling through your food, you can pretend they're not there. Protein is protein, after all. I've eaten some questionable gas station food in my time, but even I draw the line somewhere before insects. The truth is, pirates didn't preserve food because they wanted to. They did it because the alternative was starvation 1,000 miles from land. Every barrel of salt pork, every jar of pickled cabbage, every weevil-infested biscuit meant another day alive. But staying alive required more than just food. You also needed warmth. And heating a wooden ship surrounded by water, that's where things got genuinely dangerous. Here's the thing about wooden ships. They're basically floating kindling. One wrong spark and your pirate career ends in a very warm, very permanent retirement. So heating anything at sea? That required serious engineering. The galley stove sat inside something called A firebox. Picture a large brick-lined box filled with sand, designed to contain any fire that might escape. The whole setup weighed hundreds of pounds and sat low in the ship where tipping was least likely. Clever, right? But here's the catch. Fires were only lit when the sea cooperated. Calm weather meant hot food. Rough weather meant cold hardtack and whatever else you could chew without cooking. During storms, that galley fire stayed dead. No exceptions. Rolling seas could spill burning coals across a wooden deck faster than you could yell for help. And once fire catches on a ship at sea, you've got maybe 10 minutes before you're swimming, if you're lucky enough to survive that long. So crews would go days eating nothing but cold salted meat and rock-hard biscuits. Not exactly a Caribbean vacation. Now, what about cold weather? Because pirates didn't just sail tropical waters. Some hunted ships off Newfoundland. Others worked the Atlantic crossing where temperatures dropped enough to freeze spray on the rigging. The solution wasn't exactly sophisticated: body heat. Lots of it. 20 men might pack into a sleeping space roughly the size of a modern bedroom. Smaller, actually. And while that sounds miserable, it worked. All those bodies generated warmth like a very smelly, very crowded furnace. Heavy wool clothing became some of the most prized loot a pirate could grab. Better than silver in some situations. Why? Because wool keeps you warm even when soaking wet. Cotton doesn't. Cotton actually pulls heat away from your body when damp. So a wool coat stolen from some merchant captain, that might save your life in January waters. I've worn wet cotton in cold weather exactly once. Never again. Those old pirates knew what they were doing. Then there's the morale factor. Hot meals did something beyond just filling stomachs. They reminded men they were human, that life wasn't entirely suffering in salt. A skilled cook who could turn dried peas, salted pork, and wormy hardtack into something resembling actual food, that man earned serious respect aboard ship. Good cooks got lighter duties. They didn't have to climb rigging in icy rain or pump bilge water for 4-hour shifts. The crew protected them like valuable cargo because, well, they were. But during storms or high winds, even the best cook couldn't help. Fires were absolutely forbidden when the ship was pitching and rolling. Everyone ate cold. Everyone suffered equally. Some storms lasted days. That meant days of nothing but hardtack, maybe some cheese, and whatever meat you could gnaw straight from the salt barrel. No warmth except what your crewmates provided by breathing and existing in that cramped space below deck. Makes modern camping look downright luxurious. The whole system depended on weather, really. Calm seas meant comfort, hot food, warm drinks, almost civilized conditions. Rough seas meant survival mode. Cold everything, constant dampness, no relief until the wind died down. And speaking of survival, staying warm was only half the battle. Eventually, exhaustion caught up with every single man aboard. Because sleeping on a pirate ship, that came with its own set of problems that might actually surprise you. Sleep on a pirate ship was a joke. And not the funny kind. You'd think after hauling ropes, scrubbing decks, and possibly fighting for your life, you'd get a solid 8 hours. Nope. Pirates worked a system called watches. 4 hours on duty, 4 hours off. Around the clock. No weekends, no holidays, no sleeping in because you're tired. Here's the math that'll make you grateful for your bed tonight. If your watch ends at midnight, you sleep until 4 in the morning. Then you're back on duty, sleep again at 8, up at noon. This cycle never stopped. Ever. The human body wasn't designed for this. Modern sleep scientists would have a heart attack looking at these schedules, but pirates just adapted. Chronic exhaustion became their normal state. They were basically zombies with swords. Now, where did they sleep? Hammocks, canvas, or rope netting slung between beams below deck. And honestly, these were brilliant. See, a hammock swings with the ship's motion instead of fighting it. So when waves rolled the vessel 30 degrees, you weren't thrown out of bed. You just swayed like a very tired pendulum. I've slept in a hammock exactly once. Woke up looking like a human taco. Pirates did this every single night and somehow functioned. But the real nightmare wasn't the short sleep cycles, it was everything else. Picture 80 men crammed into a space maybe 20 feet wide. The snoring alone could drown out cannon fire. Then add coughing, groaning, someone scratching themselves constantly, and that one guy who talks in his sleep about his mother's cooking. And the smell? Let's just say these men hadn't bathed in weeks, months sometimes. You've got body odor, rotting teeth, infected wounds, and the general funk of men who've been eating salted pork and hardtack. Finding a quiet corner away from all this? Impossible. Every inch of space had a body in it. Officers had it different, though. Captains and quartermasters got small private cabins with actual beds, real mattresses. A door that closed. This was one of the main privileges separating leadership from common crew. Some men probably became officers just for the sleeping arrangements. Makes sense, right? Then there were the emergencies. During battles or major storms, something called all hands was called. That meant exactly what it sounds like. Everyone works. Nobody sleeps. You might be hauling lines, manning pumps, or loading cannons for 24 hours straight, sometimes 48. When the danger finally passed, men literally collapsed where they stood, on coiled ropes, against cannons, face down on the deck. Didn't matter, your body simply shut down and you slept wherever you dropped. One sailor's journal mentioned sleeping standing up while wedged between two barrels. His crewmates thought he died until he started snoring. The weird part is, pirates somehow got used to this. The body's ability to adapt is honestly terrifying. After a few months, 4-hour chunks of sleep felt normal. Waking up confused in a swaying hammock surrounded by smelly strangers became routine. Veterans could fall asleep in 30 seconds flat, probably because they were permanently exhausted. But here's what kept men going through all this sleep deprivation: the promise of eventual wealth. You don't need 8 hours when you're dreaming of Spanish gold. Still, even the most hardened pirate couldn't function if his ship was falling apart beneath him. And wooden ships in salt water? They leaked constantly, which meant someone had to fix them, often in the middle of the ocean, with limited tools and zero room for error. Wooden ships and water don't mix. Sounds obvious, right? But here's the thing. Every single vessel that ever sailed was constantly leaking. Every single one. The question wasn't whether your ship had leaks. The question was whether you could fix them faster than the ocean could fill your hold. And pirates? They couldn't exactly pull into a repair shop. The main weapon against leaks was oakum, old rope fibers shredded apart and soaked in hot tar until they formed a sticky, stringy mess. Sailors hammered this stuff into every gap between hull planks using special tools called caulking irons. Picture spending your afternoon pounding terry rope bits into cracks while seawater drips on your head. Glamorous pirate life indeed. Now here's where it gets serious. Every pirate crew needed a carpenter. Not wanted, needed. This guy earned higher wages than almost anyone else on board because his skills literally determined whether people lived or drowned. A good ship's carpenter could patch a hole in total darkness, waist deep in rising water, with the ship rolling 30 degrees. Try that with your IKEA assembly skills. But what about bigger damage? Cannonballs through the hull. Rocks nobody saw coming. Angry whales. Yes, that happened more than you'd think. For emergency situations, ships carried collision mats. These were large canvas sheets smeared with oakum and tar. When something punched a hole in your ship, crew members would drag this mat around the outside of the hull and position it over the damage. Water pressure actually pushed the mat tighter against the hole. Pretty clever for guys who didn't have YouTube tutorials. Lead sheets served as another backup. Ships stored flat pieces of lead that could be nailed directly over damaged sections. Was it a permanent fix? Absolutely not. Would it keep you floating long enough to reach port? Usually. The lead was soft enough to hammer into place quickly, but strong enough to hold back water pressure. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a broken leg. Not ideal, but better than bleeding out. And when all else failed? Pumps. Hand-operated bilge pumps lived in the lowest part of the ship. When leaks got serious, men worked these pumps in shifts around the clock. 4 hours pumping, 4 hours resting, 4 hours pumping again. I've complained about desk work being tiring, but imagine doing arm exercises for 16 hours straight while your ship slowly sinks. Really puts Monday meetings into perspective. Then there was careening. This was the nuclear option for hull repair. Pirates would find a secluded beach, wait for low tide, and tip their ship onto its side. This exposed the entire bottom for scraping off barnacles, replacing rotten planks, and resealing everything with fresh tar. Sounds simple enough, except for one problem. Your ship sat helpless on a beach for days, maybe a week. Any Navy vessel that spotted you would catch you completely defenseless. Your cannons pointed uselessly at the sky. Your crew scattered across the sand. You'd basically left your front door wide open with a sign saying, "Please arrest me." Smart captains posted lookouts miles away and kept small boats ready for emergency escapes. But many pirates got captured exactly this way. The Royal Navy knew about careening spots and patrolled them specifically. Keeping a ship seaworthy was constant, exhausting work, but at least repairs had an endpoint. Daily chores? Those never stopped. And what pirates did every single day might surprise you. All right, so the ship's not sinking, everyone's sort of rested, and the food hasn't killed anyone yet. Now what? Well, now comes the actual work. And trust me, there was a lot of it. Swabbing the deck wasn't some punishment you see in movies. It happened every single day. Salt water, fish guts, blood from last week's fight, whatever the chickens left behind. All of it turned the deck into a slippery, disease-spreading mess if you ignored it. So every morning, pirates grabbed mops and brushes and scrubbed like their lives depended on it. Because, honestly, they did. Then there's sail repair. Those massive canvas sheets took a beating from wind, rain, and the occasional cannonball. One decent tear could leave you drifting in the middle of nowhere. Every sailor knew how to sew heavy canvas, threading thick needles through fabric so tough it destroyed your hands. Not exactly glamorous work, but a pirate who couldn't mend a sail was about as useful as a screen door on a submarine. Navigation duties fell to the captain or quartermaster, and this was serious business. No GPS, no satellites, just a compass, some charts that were probably half wrong, and the sun at noon. They'd measure the sun's angle with a device called a quadrant, do some math, and hope they were pointing the right direction. Getting lost in the open ocean meant death, plain and simple. So yeah, the navigator was basically the most important person aboard. But here's the thing about pirate life. Most of it was boring, incredibly, mind-numbingly boring. Days blurred together, same ocean, same faces, same smell. So what did pirates do with their free time? Gambling. Lots and lots of gambling. Dice and cards consumed hours, and these guys weren't betting coins they had in their pockets. They bet shares of future plunder, loot they hadn't even stolen yet. I've made some questionable bets in my life, but wagering money from a treasure ship you might never find? That's commitment to poor financial decisions. Weapons maintenance was another daily task. Swords needed sharpening, pistols needed oiling. Rust was the enemy of every metal object on a ship surrounded by salt water. A pirate whose cutlass stuck in its scabbard during a boarding action was a dead pirate. Simple as that. So they cleaned, oiled, and sharpened constantly. Their weapons were their livelihood. And the weird part? Music played a huge role in daily life. Fiddles, squeeze boxes, anything that made noise. Sea shanties weren't just entertainment. They were tools. When 30 men needed to haul a heavy rope at the exact same moment, singing kept everyone synchronized. The rhythm told them when to pull. Plus, after weeks of nothing but creaking wood and snoring sailors, any music felt like a concert. The funny thing is, pirate ships ran more democratically than most governments of that era. Crew members voted on decisions. The captain could be removed if people got fed up with him. There were actual written contracts spelling out everyone's duties and shares. More organized than my last group project, honestly. Life aboard was an adventure after adventure. It was maintenance, boredom, gambling, and brief moments of sheer terror separated by weeks of routine. The ones who survived weren't necessarily the toughest fighters. They were the ones who could handle monotony without going crazy. But all that mundane daily stuff, it meant nothing when dark clouds started building on the horizon. Because storms didn't care about your clean deck or sharp sword. Storms didn't care how tough you were. Pirates faced plenty of enemies. Navy ships, rival crews, disease, starvation. But nothing terrified them quite like watching the sky turn black and the sea rise up like it wanted to swallow them whole. When a storm hit, the first job was getting those sails down. Fast. Sounds simple enough until you realize it meant climbing rope ladders in 60-mile-per-hour winds 100 feet above a deck that was pitching like a bucking horse. One wrong grip and you'd fall. Not onto the deck either, into churning water where nobody could save you, even if they wanted to. The canvas had to be tied down tight before gusts could shred it to ribbons. A torn sail in a storm wasn't just inconvenient, it could tip the whole ship over. So men climbed into that howling chaos, fingers numb, rain hitting their faces like needles, and they did their job, because the alternative was drowning. Now here's something that might surprise you. Smart pirates actually tied themselves to things. Masts, railings, anything bolted down. Waves during serious storms didn't politely splash over the side. They crashed across the entire deck with enough force to sweep a grown man into the ocean like he weighed nothing. Being tied to a solid piece of wood suddenly seemed a lot less embarrassing than being fish food. But that wasn't even the biggest problem. Ships leaked. All wooden ships leaked, even good ones. In calm weather, you might pump out a few buckets every hour. In a storm? Water poured through deck hatches, found gaps in hull seams, and flooded the lower decks faster than you'd believe. Bilge pumps worked by hand. No electricity, no engines, just men taking turns cranking handles until their arms burned and their backs screamed. During bad storms, pumping became a rotation that never stopped. The moment you slowed down, the ship got heavier. Heavier ships sat lower in the water. Lower ships took on more waves. You see where this is going. Then there was the cargo problem. Everything stored below had weight, and weight distribution mattered more than most people realize. Before a storm hit, crews scrambled to shift barrels and crates toward the center of the ship, lowering what sailors called the center of gravity. Physics, basically. A top-heavy ship rolls easier. A bottom-heavy ship fights to stay upright. Sometimes the best strategy was running before the wind. Sounds cowardly, right? It wasn't. Running meant turning your stern toward the storm and letting it push you. You lost control over direction, sure, but you reduced the stress on your masts and rigging. Better to end up 50 miles off course than at the bottom of the Caribbean. And speaking of the Caribbean, here's a grim fact. Hurricane season killed more pirates than the Royal Navy ever did. Those warm waters that made sailing pleasant for most of the year turned deadly between June and November. Ships vanished without warning, entire crews gone. No battles, no glory, just bad timing and worse weather. Surviving a storm meant no hot food for days. Any fire below deck during rough seas could spill burning coals and turn your ship into a floating bonfire. So pirates ate cold hardtack and gnawed on salty meat, wet and exhausted, waiting for the sky to clear. When storms finally passed, the real work began. Damage assessment, repairs, figuring out where the wind had blown them. Which brings us to what happened when things went really wrong and the food started running out. When the barrels ran empty and the last weevil-infested hardtack was gone, pirates entered a nightmare that makes modern dieting look like a spa retreat. Fishing became everyone's job. Every single person on that ship suddenly developed a passionate interest in hooks and lines. But here's the cruel joke. Open ocean is basically a desert. All that water and the fish are miles below or congregated near coasts you can't reach. A crew could dangle lines for days and catch nothing but disappointment, so they looked up instead of down. Seabirds stupid enough to land on the rigging became dinner. These weren't plump chickens. We're talking stringy, oily meat that tasted like the ocean floor smelled. But when you haven't eaten in 4 days, a seagull starts looking like a Thanksgiving turkey. Crews assigned men to sit perfectly still for hours, waiting to grab any bird that landed. Patience paid in protein. Then things got weirder. Leather, your belt, your shoes, your hat, if it had any animal hide in it. All of it went into the pot. Pirates would boil leather for hours, sometimes an entire day, until it softened into something you could technically chew. Did it taste good? Absolutely not. Did it provide much nutrition? Barely. But the act of chewing and swallowing something solid kept men psychologically together when their bodies were falling apart. I'd rather eat my shoe than nothing at all, and apparently so would they. And the rats? Those disgusting creatures living in the hold, eating your grain, spreading disease? Suddenly they're not pests. They're lunch. Crews organized actual rat hunts below deck. Men who caught the most earned respect and a bigger share of the catch. They'd trap them, roast them over tiny fires, and eat every bit. Rat meat is actually decent protein if you can get past what you're doing, which, when you're starving, becomes surprisingly easy. But here's where it gets truly dark. Some ships never found land, never caught fish, ran out of rats, and in those desperate final days, Documented in actual court records and survivor testimonies, crews drew lots. Short straw died. Cannibalism aboard stranded vessels wasn't common, but it happened enough that we have multiple verified accounts. Men who survived these ordeals testified about it openly. No shame, just grim honesty about what starvation drives humans to do. The ocean doesn't care about your morals, it just keeps stretching toward the horizon. Makes you grateful for grocery stores, doesn't it? The lucky crews spotted land before reaching that point. Any landfall meant salvation. Turtles were the jackpot. Slow, meaty, easy to catch. A single large turtle could feed 10 men for a day. Coconuts provided both hydration and calories. Anything that moved on that island was getting caught and eaten. Survivors described these feeding frenzies lasting days. Men who'd been walking skeletons would gorge until they got sick, rest, then gorge again. They'd hunt that island clean before their strength returned enough to sail. What's fascinating is how quickly pirates bounced back. A week of proper eating and rest transformed dying men into functional sailors again. The human body is remarkably resilient when you finally give it what it needs. But surviving starvation was only half the challenge. You still had to find the ships worth chasing, catch them, and take their cargo by force. And spotting a target vessel before they spotted you? That required tactics, patience, and intelligence gathering that would make modern spy agencies jealous. Finding a ship in the middle of the ocean sounds impossible. No GPS, no radar, no satellites, just endless blue water in every direction. Yet pirates managed to intercept treasure ships with remarkable accuracy. How? They weren't guessing. They were hunting. The crow's nest changed everything. Stick a lookout about 100 feet above the deck, and suddenly his visible horizon extends roughly 12 miles on a clear day. That's basic geometry working in your favor. A guy standing on deck can see maybe 3 miles to the horizon. But climb that mast? You've just quadrupled your search radius. Pirates stationed their sharpest-eyed crewmen up there for hours, scanning for the tiniest speck that might be a sail. But here's what most people miss. Pirates didn't randomly sail around hoping to bump into treasure ships. That would be like fishing in the entire Atlantic with one hook. Instead, they knew exactly where to wait. Shipping lanes were the highways of the sea. Spanish treasure fleets followed predictable routes from the Americas back to Europe. English merchant ships sailed established paths between colonies. These routes existed because of wind patterns and currents that made certain paths faster and safer. Pirates studied these patterns obsessively. They positioned themselves at choke points like the Straits of Florida or the Windward Passage, where ships had to funnel through narrow channels. Basically, highway robbery, except the highway was water. And the intelligence network? Honestly impressive for guys we think of as dirty criminals. Spies hung around in port taverns, buying drinks for loose-lipped sailors. A merchant captain bragging about his cargo after a few rums was basically advertising to pirates. These informants gathered departure dates, cargo manifests, crew sizes, and how many cannons each ship carried. Some pirates paid regular stipends to dock workers who could pass along information about which ships carried gold versus which hauled boring stuff like lumber. Here's something clever. Smoke travels far. A ship's cooking fire produces smoke visible over the horizon long before the mast appears. Experienced pirates could spot that gray smudge in the distance and know a ship was there before anyone on that ship knew they were being watched. It's like smelling someone's barbecue from 3 blocks away, except the stakes were slightly higher. Wealthy pirate crews operated scout ships, fast little sloops that could outrun almost anything on the water. These scouts raced ahead, located potential targets, then circled back to report positions to the main attack vessel. The big ship conserved energy while the little one did all the legwork. Pretty smart division of labor for supposed criminals. The corruption ran deep too. Harbor officials and merchants took bribes to hand over shipping manifests. For the right price, a pirate captain could know exactly which vessel carried 50,000 Spanish dollars and which one was stuffed with tobacco. Why waste time chasing ships full of cotton when you could specifically target the one loaded with silver? Some colonial governors were basically on pirate payrolls. They provided safe harbor, advance warning about naval patrols, and documents that made everything look legitimate. The line between legal privateer and illegal pirate often depended entirely on which official had been paid recently. All this hunting and tracking produced results. But catching a target was only half the battle. What good is stolen cargo if you can't sell it? Turns out pirates had that figured out too, and the network of fences, corrupt officials, and shady merchants who helped them cash in was somehow even shadier than the pirates themselves. So you've got a ship full of stolen silk, barrels of Spanish wine, and maybe a chest of silver coins. Great. But here's the problem nobody talks about. You can't exactly walk into a London shop and sell goods with the Spanish crown seal still on them. That's a quick trip to the gallows. This is where the real business of piracy happened. And honestly, it worked a lot like a shady pawn shop, just with more rum involved. Fences operated in pirate-friendly ports like Nassau and Port Royal. These weren't back alley criminals. Many were respected merchants with nice houses and fancy clothes. They'd buy your stolen cargo, no questions asked. The catch? You'd get maybe 10 to 30 cents on the dollar. That's silk worth 1,000 pounds? You're walking away with 200 if you're lucky. Sounds unfair, right? Well, what's your alternative? Sail into Boston Harbor and try to explain why your cargo manifest is written in Spanish. But wait, the corruption went way higher than street-level fences. Colonial governors, the actual appointed representatives of European crowns, would issue fake paperwork for the right price. Your stolen sugar becomes legitimate Jamaican export. Your pirated tobacco gets official customs stamps. One signature and a fat bribe turned you from a wanted criminal into a respectable trader. Some governors made more money from pirate kickbacks than from their actual salaries. I'd say that's corruption, but honestly, it was just good business sense for everyone except the original owners. Now here's where pirates got clever about valuable items. Silver candlesticks with family crests, melt them down immediately. Gold jewelry with identifiable markings, into the fire. What comes out are plain, unmarked ingots that could have come from anywhere. No merchant in the Caribbean was going to run metallurgical tests to check if your silver bar used to be some duchess's tea set. The transformation was quick too. A skilled man with a small forge could turn traceable treasure into anonymous wealth in a single afternoon. And the auction houses? These places would make modern estate sales look honest. Lawless ports held regular auctions where everything sold. Silk, spices, sugar, and yes, even human beings. Buyers showed up with cash and left with cargo. The auctioneers kept no records worth mentioning. Everyone pretended the goods fell off a completely legitimate ship that nobody could quite remember the name of. Ships themselves were prizes worth more than most cargo holds. A captured vessel got a new paint job, a different name, and forged registration papers. Within weeks, a Spanish merchant ship became a Dutch trading vessel. The transformation was so complete that sometimes pirates accidentally attacked ships they'd stolen and sold years earlier. But here's the part that actually made piracy function as a career. Written contracts called articles governed everything, including how loot got divided. These weren't suggestions. They were legally binding agreements that pirates took seriously. Captains received 2 shares, quartermasters got 1.5, common crew members got 1 share each. Injured pirates received compensation too. Lose a right arm? That's 600 pieces of 8. Left leg? 400. These rates were agreed upon before sailing. Makes the whole operation sound almost corporate, doesn't it? That's because it was. Pirates ran businesses. Violent, illegal businesses that occasionally involved cannons, but businesses nonetheless. The treasure had to move. And an entire underground economy existed to make that happen.